Thank you very, very much, Anna and Wakar, for your very kind words of introduction. Needless to say, I don't really recognize myself in those terms at all. I'm humbled to see so many of you here this afternoon. Thanks very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us. Particular thanks go to colleagues who visit us from outside Middlesex University. Colleagues and people I'm delighted to say have become friends for a very long time. I'm truly grateful that you could be here as well. Journey Towards Happiness is, in a sense, what it says on the tin. It is a journey, and it allows me to take you on that journey in the sense of reflection of my own career, starting in a very different area and then almost accidentally stumbling across the area of happiness for the last 10 years or so, and I have really, during that period, done very little else. There's a particular person in this very room who is almost entirely responsible for that, and I will pay tribute to him when the time arrives. But of course, before I do this, before we go into this lecture, let me just share with you a little bit of unhappiness. Certainly that's how I perceived it. To the run-up of today's event, both my wife, the Dean, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, impressed upon me the importance of today. Very important event. They told me, don't mess it up. They told me, you know, take it with the seriousness it deserves. Behave yourself. Now, I was taken aback by this quite a bit. You know, I felt a bit hurt. I thought, well, you know, what do these people take me for? You know, of course I know this is a really important event that needs to be taken seriously. I realize, of course I do, that there are some very important, very senior people in the audience, combined with my wife being in the room. So I must behave. Now, as it so happens, I read the other day an article in an esteemed journal. I don't think it's an ABS-listed journal. It's one of those really important journals that tell you if you subscribe, you get the life's supply of a tub of firming cream with it. So, you know, a serious outlet. And there were a number of points raised and advice given in that article that struck a chord with me. And I thought, right at the beginning of today's lecture, I share some of the various points raised in the article, specifically 3 points, with you, demonstrating that I indeed fully understood the advice given. So for the purpose of reassurance, number 1, it says, don't make any references to specific nationalities and their alleged behaviors and personality traits. Audiences often don't like this kind of thing. So, Anna, right at the outset, I promised there will be no reference whatsoever in my lecture about people from Greece or whether or not they do pay their taxes. It's frankly irrelevant. Number 2, don't be ageist. There may well be people in the audience, the article says, who are much older than you, and it's not their fault. So, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, I promise that there will be no reference to anyone's age, including yours. So, yeah. Number 3, having an audience on your side is a bit like dating, the article says. Of all the factors that determine whether somebody likes you or not, one of the strongest is whether that person thinks you like them. So again, at the outset, I want you all to know that I like you very, very much indeed. And then, in the spirit of what Anna already alluded to, I added the 4th point, quite important for me personally, and it reads, for goodness sake, don't try and be funny, after all, you are from Germany. So, so no jokes in that lecture then. Okay, now with these reassurances out of the way, let's begin this journey, if I may. As you would expect from a German boy, there has to be structure to this lecture. This is the structure, broadly speaking. It's a personal journey, as Waka has kindly already summarized, spanning 20 or so years in the academy, a game of two halves in many ways, because, again, as it was already explained, the first half very much about training, the political economy of training, particular reference to Germany. And then later, a much more profound focus on happiness, the economics of happiness, a particular domain within the happiness arena in terms of job satisfaction. It has been a scholarly journey, a managerial journey, as has already been mentioned, but never a lonely journey, and that's in large measure because of the people I was fortunate enough to work with and to share my journey with. Many co-authors, a number of them in the audience here today. I'm truly grateful for them allowing me to be part of their journey. The second part will then be about really why happiness is, certainly in my book, such an exciting research arena. Many people have different answers perhaps to that question. Mine is primarily that it allows me to question intuition and to rattle a bit the cages in terms of conventional wisdom. And I want to demonstrate this sort of right at the end by sharing with you a little bit about my recent work on the topic why the self-employed are so happy at work. So the scholarly journal started in the year 1993. There is physical evidence to that fact. This is it. This is my first ever English language peer-reviewed publication, dated 1993. It was, not surprisingly, on training and active labor market intervention at the time in the context of German unification. More broadly speaking, this is the sort of thing I used to do during the first decade. So I looked at the economics of training, political economy, Germany, a very important reference point in that regard. The motivation very much was observations by others who claimed that the German training system is superior to others, a model for emulation. Not a description I could easily accept or go along with, I suppose. I looked at it very much in the sense of a system as a product of a post-war consensus. In the political realm, an outcome of a complicated political process linked to historical origins with a considerable degree of self-interest alongside its corporatist roots and values. So in essence, the argument at the time very much was an alternative model that I certainly saw to outright collectivism or outright segmentalism. And as a consequence of that observation or that analysis, I argued then, as I would argue now, that the emulation of such a system is unlikely to be successful, as the slide here stipulates, unless this tangled web of political processes and interests and values is indeed fully understood. The next 10 years were pretty much the same theme with slight variations, slightly different country foci. We are moving on and jump quite quickly now to the year 2004-05. Somebody with whom I have had the pleasure of working previously on training and on in a more mainstream economics research agenda, we got in touch again. This person's in this very room today. Professor Yanis Georgelis, somebody who has been a friend for a very long time. He has known me longer than my wife knows me, and she will probably say not a bad thing, that is. He has no idea, I suspect, how influential he has been to my career, and certainly to my career in the last 10 years. Yanis and I worked together, as Waka has already said, on training and happiness in the workplace at a time. A paper that was ultimately published in the International Journal of HRM in 2007. And since then, my work has captured a number of these sort of things: job satisfaction and cultural values and beliefs, economic development and cultural change, especially in the context of India at the time. The whole area of self-determination, the importance of autonomy and independence in the workplace has featured prominently in that work. Life events, again, something that I've had the pleasure to work with Yanis on. And the third musketeer, so to speak, who is also in the audience today, Dr. Virendra Boomer. The three of us placed that piece ultimately in the Journal of Vocational Behavior. Past experience, future fear of unemployment, and how that links to job satisfaction. And perhaps most recently, socialization and orientation training. We've had lovely news just a couple of weeks ago from Human Resource Management, the US journal, where we will publish this piece in due course. This is a bit of a gallery. Gives you a bit of an insight into the kind of outlets I've published over the years. It's also, interestingly, somewhat chronological. In this that's where I started. Political Quarterly, Scottish Journal of Political Economy, International Journal of Manpower, threw in a book for good measure. The co-author of that book is in the audience as well, Professor Jeff Pugh, again, a very, very good and close friend of mine for some 20 years now. Journal of Management Inquiry. The bottom half, the top half is very much a sort of economics-y type of work I've done, and the bottom half, almost a reinvention of myself, then positions me much more in the human resource management arena, albeit with a very quantitative, empirical focus. So that's really what this slide is about. Alongside the scholarly journey, developed, again, almost accidental, a journey, a career path in management, a managerial journey, if you will. Again, this slide just summarizes some of the milestones or the stopgaps I've had over the years, starting off in Aberdeen in the mid-90s, during which I became that infamous youngest professor in Britain person. The good thing about that is as time goes by, it sort of disappears, you know, because of course you never stay young. My apprenticeship, if you will, in senior management and leadership as Dean in PVC at Glendower University in Wales. Number of very happy years. I'm sure my wife will agree with me. In Auckland in New Zealand, where I served as research dean and as chair of a quite powerful department alongside it. A couple of years at at Bournemouth University Business School, where again I've learned a lot of things from a lot of people. Australia for a couple of years. Life events necessitated the return to Europe. Don't want to bore you with the details. And here I am, Middlesex. So that's sort of the shortcut of sort of a mini CV of my journey. But that's of course not really it, because at each stage I have been extremely fortunate to work with, frankly, some amazing people, some absolutely outstanding people, both in terms of scholarship and in terms of management and leadership. And every time you do that, if you're reasonably clever, you pick the good bits and you learn from them. And I'd like to think I've done that over the last 20 years. Of course, it's a never-ending journey because you can always learn new things. Somebody who can't be with us here today, Professor Roger Levy, was an inspiration during my time in Aberdeen. We are very, very good, close friends to this very day. Learned a great deal from Mike Scott, the Vice Chancellor at Glendower. Anybody who knows Mike Scott will know that he's not an easy person to work with, but he too has taught me some very, very important lessons during my time there. The late Professor Des Graydon sadly passed away far too early a few years ago, was an inspiration during my time in Auckland, and so on it goes really. I'm now fortunate to work with people like Waka and Anna and all you guys in the audience, frankly. I'm learning every day from that. It's a fascinating journey. This is a bit of an input-output table, and it shouldn't be read as such because it would be misleading. But these are the sort of the roles and responsibilities during that journey I've just mentioned to you, and these are sort of some of the highlights, avoiding the lowlights in the in the process if I can. And they sort of again summarize to some extent a very interesting, a very fascinating, endeavor that I could never have done on my own. So that's why this input-output model doesn't work. This is not me being a dean or a PVC, and therefore that is what happened. Okay, what really worked, and this is part of my personal happiness agenda, if you will, is I happened to have been in that place. I was fortunate enough to meet and work with some amazing people, as a consequence of which we could achieve the following. That's how this table should really be read. And some amazing successes. And they are almost entirely attributable not to me, but to my colleagues and my fellow academicians and management chums and chumses at the time. This is the real perk. I hope this will be a little bit inspirational for the younger, early career type people in the audience today. Okay? What is the perk of an academic career, or in this case, a combined academics management kind of career? Some would argue it's the above average salary that you may get. Others may point towards a glitzy title that you hold. For me, it was working with some outstanding characters over the years. I was so lucky, so fortunate to meet these people and to work very closely with them. Some you may know, others you may not. Henry McLeish, at the time when I worked very closely with him, was the First Minister of Scotland. Great guy, trained economist, as it happens, just like myself. The Deputy Minister for Enterprise and Lifelong Learning, Stephen Nichol, MSP, appointed me to the board of the university, Scottish University for Industry, which was led at the time by this guy, Frank Pignatelli, CBE, who again, to this very day, has become and has remained a very close friend of mine. Nguyen Nan, until last year, the Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam, a fascinating guy to meet as part and parcel of work I've done for the Ministry of Education and Training in Vietnam a few years ago, fluent in German. Amazing, amazing. John Key, Prime Minister of New Zealand, very, very nice chap. Both Ellie and I had the fortune of meeting him in Auckland. I've reported directly to him because I was, again, fortunate enough to be part of the Economic Policy Advisory Group of the National Party, who is, of course, as some of you may know, the party of government in New Zealand. These people are amazing people. They are often very different from the public persona they portray when the TV cameras roll. Very down to earth, many of them, wicked sense of humor. I should know since I haven't got one. Down here more recently, very fortunate in, I think it was 2005 or 2006, to share a platform with one of my idols, Nobel laureate Michael Spence, on the right, and again somebody who has become a very, very good friend of mine, Shuming Zhao, the Dean of Nanjing University Business School. At the same time, the real idol of mine and I shook hands, Eddie Lazier, godfather of personnel economics, nicest guy ever. Really down-to-earth people, Stanford University professors. So you sort of become a bit jittery at the time when you meet them first, but you realize very soon they are kind of normal. And they have become even more normal at the end of the conference when the Chinese hosts gave up this sort of what looked like domestos, sort of little short shots of whiskey and liquor. They became extremely funny. This person, somebody we know at Middlesex very well, Karren Brady Cbe. She visited us here not that long ago. During my time at Bournemouth University, I was fortunate enough to work with her on one of the Dean's lectures that she was kind enough to provide. John Cotter, Harvard professor, godfather of many things to do with leadership and change management. if you ever hear the notion, the sense of urgency, in the context of change management, this is your man, in terms of who brought this to the fore. Again, I was very fortunate to work with him as part of the change management agenda during my time in Australia. That's the real perks for me. Fascinating people, really, really interesting. Part of my personal happiness agenda. Back to my own scholarship. Perhaps that's what should really be the focus of today's lecture. I've mentioned to you at the beginning the reason why I find the happiness agenda so fascinating and so interesting. It's because of what I call counterintuitive observations or questioning the conventional wisdom kind of observations. So some of these examples I want to share with you. Often it is said, money makes us happy, or money can buy us happiness. It's a controversial thing. It is still a controversial thing in the literature. One of the most powerful graphs that made me reconsider this conventional wisdom is this, where it clearly shows you that over time, this is for the US, income and happiness in the United States, over quite a number of years, the percentage of people saying they're very happy stayed pretty much flat, whilst actually their real income per head grew very, very substantially indeed. Okay, so one of the counterintuitive conventional wisdom type examples. Work-life balance is always a good thing, some would argue. Well, is it? I mean, the idea here, of course, is that if there's a perfect balance, you're extremely happy. If work wears you down, you become increasingly miserable. And if life takes over completely, you're looking for a job. Okay, so that's basically what this figure tells you. But hang on, not so fast, right? Because we know, do we not, that there is this wonderful thing called spillover from one domain into the other. Yeah, so if we are actually extremely happy with long working hours, that may well have a positive impact on our job happiness, the job satisfaction. So balance may not necessarily be the ultimate goal. Increasingly in the literature, people talk about not work-life balance, but work-life enrichment as a consequence. Now, ladies in the audience, ceteris paribus, everything else being equal, we know, it has been demonstrated many, many times, that even if you work the same shifts, the same hours, facing the same complexity of work as your male counterparts, more often than not, you get paid less. It's true. So, it's not unreasonable to argue that the ultimate conclusion from that observation would be, well, women must be miserable at work as a consequence, in a relative context, right? So you would expect this to emerge, this to find, you know, the miserable, concerned, worn down female worker. What you actually find, more often than not, interestingly, in the empirical HR literature, is this. Compared with men, women are often, more often, happier at work than men. Intuitively makes very little sense. I hope you get a feel or a little bit of a snippet as to why I find this area so fascinating and why I will never be grateful enough to this man here, Yanis Georgelis, for introducing me, or should I say seducing me, into this particular area of scholarship. I say it is broadly defined. The wife is here, you understand, but that's the real truth. Now, next question in that context, because we are in a business school, let's not forget, okay, all this happiness malarkey, very interesting, very, perhaps quite fascinating even. Why should business care? Right? I mean, this is happiness. This is soft, whooshy, squishy stuff. Nobody really knows what to do with this, really. From a business perspective, all too often that's sadly the case. Why should business care? Well, the very simple answer is because it's in the economic interest of business to have an interest in this and in happy workers. Why? Because in study after study, in the empirical realm, that a number of the colleagues here in this room have contributed to. So the tribute must go much more to them than it should ever go to me. Because these things are associated with job satisfaction. People are more productive if they're happy at work. They're less likely to quit their job if they're happy at work. I mean, it's not an out-and-out guarantee, yes, but it helps. They're less likely to be absent from work. You know, the whole absenteeism agenda. They're more likely to show commitment to their work. They're more likely to be loyal to their employer if they are happy as compared to not being so happy in the work arena. That's why business should care. And these are just some of the issues. Job satisfaction, happiness at work, is as good as a predictor of quits as is wages. The literature will tell us. Absenteeism and lateness behavior I've mentioned already. Productivity in the workplace I've already mentioned. Warwick University has recently conducted a study in a lab context and found that if you're happy at work, you're 12% more productive than if you're not. I've seen studies previously that talk about up to 30% more productive than if you're unhappy. Predictors of happiness in the workplace, job satisfaction, are manifold. Gender, I've already mentioned. Life events, important too. Income. It is important. Despite the picture I've shown you earlier, income matters. At least in the short term, at least in a cross-sectional sense, it matters. It matters even more if you look at things like relative income. Okay? So if I go to Waka and I ask him to give me a pay rise, and Waka being the way he is, he would say no chance. Then my relative satisfaction will go up if I go back to him and say, oh, that's all right, then can you give Anna a pay cut then, please? Because it's the relativity of my income in the sense of a comparison group that matters more than my actual income does. As a random example, you understand. This thing has grown quite a bit in the literature. Autonomy and independence in the workplace. Self-determination theory has been around for a while. It's now complemented more and more by empirical studies. Economists have come to the table as well. They're like that too now that large data sets are available in the world. And this is effectively very much the topic of the paper I want to share with you very briefly. Why are the self-employed so happy? It's another counterintuitive observation, if you will. Because what do we know about the self-employed? OECD statistics will tell us they work longer hours than your average employee. They earn less on average than your average employee. They face higher risks. They find it more difficult to access benefits, things like mortgages, things like pensions. And yet, in many, many studies, we find they're happier than the employees. Makes no sense. It's a completely counterintuitive observation, really, at first glance. That was the motivation behind this paper. Effectively, two schools of thoughts. Briefly, in one corner, the psychologists and the general management people will say, oh, well, it's about personality. That's what matters. Don't you understand? They are very different people. It's a very different breed, the self-employed, than employees are. They are less prone to being miserable. They are more optimistic. They like to take risks, otherwise they wouldn't have become a self-employed person. So their happiness is almost predetermined in that sense. That's why they're happier. Whereas economists, such as Bruno Frey and others, would say, well, really, personality traits, I'm not so sure. Perhaps this is really about being in control, being not on the receiving end all the time of instructions, but giving out those instructions, having that sort of element of autonomy and independence, which they refer to as procedural utility. Don't want to bore you with that, because Anna's quite right, economics, happiness, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's skip that one. That was the data set I used or utilized for this study. Is the European Social Survey. Data were collected in 2006 and 2007. The summary is on this very slide. A very, very big data set, captures over 20 European countries. For each country, roughly 2,000 observations. It's nationally representative. It's very rich. It has information on job satisfaction, which helps, of course, in the context of this talk and in this paper. It has information on various socio-demographic characteristics of people. It has, importantly, in the context of personality traits, information on levels of optimism, self-confidence, depression, autonomy, and independence, which helps in the context of this paper. A range of personal values and beliefs are thrown in for good measure. Once you exclude some of the missing data and the missing information on the main variables you want to consider, you end up with 19 countries, still a very large data set you can analyze. Then you are lazy, or I was. I want to reduce the noise in the data set, so I look at workers in full employment, full-time employment. I focus on individuals aged 18 to 65 only. I arrive at an effective sample of just over 11,000 observations across Europe, just over 6,000 for men, just under 5,000 for women. Some basic measures to, if you will, it's sort of an early robustness check. You know, is this data actually sort of what the literature tells us it should be? So, in other words, are the self-employed happier than their employee counterparts? Are they, on average, more allowed to decide how daily work is organized? Yes or no? Allowed to influence an organization's policy decision, extent to which, and so on. And just by reference to some very, very simple crosstabs, you see that, in essence, it's all there. It's all there. It all tells you the story. The self-employed are happier. Their mean job satisfaction on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 means you're as miserable as you can be, and 10 means you couldn't be happier if you tried. A bit like Varane, Yannis and I, when we heard about the HRM US paper, right? Varane told me earlier he hasn't stopped smiling for 2 weeks, which must be painful. So happier than the employees. More in charge, as you would expect them to be. Things like optimism, a marked difference between the two. So perhaps the psychologists have a point. Perhaps it is about personality traits. Not least if you then look at the other indicators we have at our disposal here. Importance to seek adventures and have an exciting life. Marked difference between the two subsamples. Feeling positive about yourself, the whole sort of self-optimism thing again, marked difference. And indeed, the feeling of depression, there is a marked and statistically significant difference between the two. Okay, so what you then do next is nothing terribly clever. The methodology is nothing special at all. It's really the story here that matters rather than what you do with the data that matters. So you run what is known as ordered probability regressions. You don't need to know really what this is all about, especially those of you who run a mile when you see an equation. This is really all about how you interpret the results. Okay? And what you're looking for here are the coefficients that have little asterisks next to them, okay, because they tell you there is statistical significance. And if it's positive, then job satisfaction goes up, and if it's negative, then job satisfaction goes down. That's sort of, in essence, the A to Z, to ordered probability regression without tears version of how to read this table. Okay. What I do here is sort of bulk standard, really, nothing terribly exciting. I start with my sort of base equation. I try to explain job satisfaction purely on the basis of whether or not you're self-employed. I expect the coefficients to be highly statistically significant at the conventional levels, in this case at the 1% level of statistical significance, and I expect it to be positive, which it is. Doesn't still explain to me why one is happier than the other, but it's a start. All right. I rerun the regression. That is now column 2. And I throw in a whole heap of socio-demographic variables. Perhaps they make a difference. Perhaps they explain to us why the self-employed are happier at work than employees. And you see a number of them, of course, as you would again expect by reference to the literature, are important. They do matter. Age matters. Being married matters. Income, certainly in a cross-sectional sense, matters. But you see, the very first coefficient up here, the self-employment coefficient, it's still positive, it's still statistically significant. So none of these things explain away the differential between happiness for one group and the other. So I then do it again. I run it for the third time. Now you have to sort of imagine that this is a very large table. Okay, so I split it in half. So I run this again, this regression. So I introduce all of those variables again, as I've done previously. And then what I do is I add value statements and personality traits to the equation and see what happens. And again, what happens, of course, is that a number of these value statements and a number of the personality traits are indeed statistically significant. They indeed matter. Psychologists don't bark up the wrong tree, in a sense. Except, you go back to the front, and you look at your self-employment coefficient again, and it is still positive, and it is still significant, highly significant, at a conventional level. So personality traits, important as they may be, have still not explained away why one is happier than the other. Final attempt. Column 4, I do it one more time. The whole shebang, all the variables in, all those variables in. And then I add a couple of autonomy indicators. Allowed to decide how daily work is organized, allowed to influence an organization's policy decision. As I would have expected, I guess, positive, highly statistically significant. But that's not it. That's not the important part. The important part happens here. The self-employment coefficient, albeit still positive, is no longer statistically significant. It has, in that sense, no more meaning. What we have, in fact, done here is we have highlighted, pinpointed, the one area that really matters, that really differentiates the two. It's not income, it's not personality traits, it's not values and beliefs, it's not social demographics. All that stuff matters, but what really matters, to put the two aside, is autonomy and independence. So the key findings here are very much in favor of the economists. So if this was a football game, a bit like Man United versus Bayern Munich yesterday, except Bayern Munich spoiled the party, it is 1-0 rather than 1-1, 1-0 for the economists in that sense, and that procedural utility seems to win the argument. Net of demographics, net of values and personality traits, autonomy and independence are the key mechanisms by which self-employment leads to higher levels of job satisfaction. If you're interested in that sort of stuff, there's more of that you can read up on. If you're not, well, then you're not. What can I say? I find it fascinating. I find this ability, this being allowed to look inside the black box, to disentangle what is inherently counterintuitive, fascinating, and as a consequence of which I will probably continue in that area for a very long time. And having people like Janus and Vervain along my side is a real bonus, and frankly, it is an honor and it is a privilege. I hope I've paid sufficient tribute to you guys. What I haven't really done is I've paid enough tribute to the other colleague over there, Jeff Pugh. He has been a very long-standing friend of mine. He has been very, very influential. We have a very, very unusual relationship. We sometimes don't speak with each other for years, literally. That's usually because I'm somewhere in the world, you know, and Jeff is somewhere else. And then we pick up the phone one day, and it's as if we never stopped talking, as if we've spoken to each other the previous day. That's the sort of friendship I have with Jeff. And beyond that, of course, we've done work together in the 90s. We've written articles together. That book that became a very successful the first English language book, in fact, on the economics of German unification. And again, it's mainly Jeff. I'm just the sort of the Klingon here, you know. I mean, it's all really Jeff who does that sort of stuff. Okay. You can tell by now the importance of not working on your own, but working with people and working with the right people. And moments like this, when you have the opportunity, you should pay tribute, because, I mean, that's what they deserve. Now, the biggest tribute of them all, of course, goes to somebody completely different. If somebody can put up with you for that long, you waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning because you have an idea about the latest paper. So you then turn around as you are, as a well-brought-up husband, and you try and tell your wife, it is 3 o'clock in the morning, do you mind if I get up now and do some work? Not such a good idea, actually, in hindsight, but it has happened. It is happening even to this day. I mean, it's quite remarkable. If somebody goes with you through thick and thin and follows you around in the world, that biggest tribute, I think, is appropriate. So, so my wife is in the audience, and the biggest tribute goes to you, Ellie. So there you go. Some take-home messages then. I've mentioned that a moment ago, but I make no apology for mentioning it again. Teamwork matters. Teamwork matters a great deal. Sometimes you're sort of in the middle and you hang around. Sometimes you take the lead. Sometimes you polish something off. I'm talking here in terms of co-authored work, of course, right? Then this sort of stuff matters. I've spoken not so long ago with our esteemed director of research, Richard Croucher, and his take on this is that your co-authors make you. Your co-authors shape you as a scholar, because you have that interaction, you have this influx of new ideas, the questioning of ideas that you yourself think was the best thing since sliced bread when you thought about it, only to get it taken off the pedestal when one of your co-authors questions it, all the right thing. So this matters a great deal. And as Professor Snoopy would say, sometimes the most ordinary things could be made extraordinary simply by doing them with the right people. And so I've been very fortunate, I think, that I have found the right people along the way. With some of them I have been working for literally 20 years. Others more recently. They have had the good grace to share their ideas with me. And I will always be grateful to them for their contribution and for their insights. So there you go. That's in a sense the journey. That was my journey, and an ongoing one. It is about happiness, but it is of course a lot more than that. And without the various people in this audience and everybody around, probably none of this would have happened, or if it would have happened, it would not have been as positive or as good as it turned out to be. Okay? So, I hope this was enough happiness. Are you happy? You all happy? You all happy? I'm happy too. Thank you.